The more educated a person is, the more likely they are to become a high-quality diehard fan. Here is Jersey's news commentary channel. Many people hold a deeply rooted misconception. They assume diehard followers are always those poorly educated rednecks, the ignorant bumpkins with little exposure to the world. They believe that the higher one's education, the less likely one is to follow blindly. The more knowledge one has, the more one respects facts. The smarter the mind, the less likely it is to fall into political idol worship. Reality is often the opposite. Today we are witnessing an increasingly bizarre and increasingly dangerous global phenomenon. The more educated a person is, the more likely they are to degenerate into a high-quality diehard fan. Whether it is some highly educated supporters of Ko Wen-je in Taiwan, the lawyers, professors, and corporate executives within the MAGA movement in the United States, or the large number of PhDs, scholars, and media elites inside and outside China who cheerlead for the Chinese Communist Party's authoritarian grand narrative, they are all repeatedly proving the same fact: education does not automatically elevate a person's cognitive standards. Sometimes it merely trains people into more sophisticated self-defense lawyers for their own beliefs. This is the truly hidden social toxin of modern society. Smart people do not necessarily have fewer biases. They are simply better at packaging their biases. Ordinary diehard followers are often simple and crude. I just believe him. The logic is simple, often heavily emotional. But highly educated diehard followers are different. They are not only more troubling, but also far more deceptive. That is because they can use an entire set of polished rhetoric to package their stance as rationality. After Ko Wen-je was sentenced in the first trial to 17 years in prison, on March 26, 2026, some supporters did not merely chant slogans. Instead, they immediately mobilized arguments about judicial procedure, political comparisons, media bias, historical precedents, the blue-green rivalry structure, anti-establishment theories, and one layer after another of elaborate defenses, eventually arriving at what sounded like a sophisticated conclusion: this is not a corruption issue, but political persecution. The MAGA movement in the United States has gone even further. Faced with any unlawful conduct by Donald Trump, any shameless reversal of his own words, even when hard facts are already laid before the public, some highly educated supporters will immediately invoke constitutional interpretations, deep state theories, media manipulation narratives, false accusation claims, and every other imaginable line of defense, stitching together what appears to be a rigorous wall of logic, exhausting every possible means of beautification and justification. China is even more 典型. Many PhDs, professors, and media professionals, fully aware of the absurdity of reality, can still write endless essays and long-winded treatises to provide theoretical justification for obviously false grand narratives, to put makeup on a system rotten to its roots, and to wave flags for Xi Jinping. This shows that intelligence does not naturally serve truth. It shows that high education and high IQ often become accomplices of power. Such people are not only skilled at deceiving themselves, but also at consciously deceiving the broader public. Therefore, what education improves is instrumental rationality, not cognitive honesty. The educational system is best at training capabilities, reading, analysis, comparison, argumentation, induction, rhetoric. But it rarely trains a far rarer ability: when facts hurt my position, am I willing to revise myself? This is what we call cognitive honesty. What many highly educated people lack is not knowledge, but precisely this kind of honesty. They may be extremely rigorous in professional matters, but the moment they enter the realms of political identity, national emotion, or leader worship, they instantly degenerate into thugs and enforcers for a party or faction. Because what drives them is no longer knowledge, but group belonging, self-image, social circles, moral superiority, identity security. As a result, knowledge no longer becomes a lamp that illuminates reality, but a shield that preserves inner order. The reason these high-quality diehard followers remain so stubborn is also because their sunk costs are enormous. For an ordinary person, admitting error costs little. But for a highly educated person, a public intellectual, or a media commentator, especially those so-called famous figures, once they have publicly supported a political figure or a narrative for years, the cost of turning back becomes extraordinarily high. Their cultivated public persona would self-destruct. Their image would collapse. So many people do not fail to see the problem. They simply do not dare face it. Thus the seemingly most rational choice becomes continuing to double down, not because of ignorance, but because the cost of admitting error is too high. This is why many highly educated groups are, paradoxically, more likely than ordinary people to slide into stubborn fanaticism. And this is precisely why highly educated diehard followers are more dangerous than ordinary ones. The destructive power of ordinary blind obedience is limited. But when highly educated groups become diehard followers, what they exert themselves to praise and defend is precisely the legitimacy of the system and the so-called theoretical foundation behind it. They manufacture a complete language system for idols, for power, and for parties. They redefine facts, shift the focus, beautify motives, and sanctify the objects they support. In the end, they package everything into a supposedly lawful and logical inevitability. Taiwan is like this. The United States is like this. China even more so. Many extreme narratives spread through society not because the masses at the bottom are naturally blind, but because there is always a group of well-educated people providing intellectual clothing for that blindness, confusing and deceiving the public. They are high-quality diehard fans, and also high-quality manufacturers of collective emotion. At the most fundamental level, what they are really defending is not the idol or the system, but the self. At the end of the day, human beings are not naturally creatures that pursue truth. Very often, what people are truly protecting is, who am I? Who do I belong to? Which side am I on? Once a political figure, an ideology, or a national narrative becomes the core scaffold through which a person understands the world, they will instinctively protect that scaffold, because once that scaffold collapses, what collapses is not merely an opinion, but the self. So the smarter a person is, sometimes the more skilled they become at using more complex logic to protect a more fragile self. That is why highly educated people are not naturally freer. Sometimes they are, in fact, more likely to become high-quality diehard fans. So what is truly scarce is not intelligence, but reflexivity. I increasingly believe this judgment. What determines whether a person will degenerate into a diehard fanatic is not education, but the moral courage of self-reflection. A person capable of self-reflection, even without high education, is unlikely to become a diehard follower. A person incapable of self-reflection, even if they are a PhD, professor, or senior media professional, may still slide step by step into absurdity and fall into the very group despised by society. So the greatest irony of modern society is not that foolish people obey blindly. It is that smart people use their intelligence to gild blind obedience with the appearance of sophistication. That is the most laughable, and the most alarming, pathology of our age.